Hello, my name is Barbara Kay, and on behalf of my co-host Susan Pertnoy and the Jewish Federation of Palm Beach County, I'd like to welcome you to our program, Mosaic.
Our focus today is history, friendship, and understanding. Our special guest is Bruce Gendelman, CEO of Bruce Gendelman Insurance Service. We'll be back with our program and our guest after this brief message.
What if you could change the world? You can. We can do it together. Federation and you. Changing the world together.
Welcome back to Mosaic, and welcome to you, Bruce Gendelman. What a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you very much. It's my great pleasure.
Listen, this wonderful book, A Tale of Two Soldiers, Susan and I thoroughly enjoyed it. It's a remarkable book. Tell me why your father wrote this book.
Well, this is his personal memoir, sort of a coming-of-age story that really focuses on his very trying experiences in World War II. And in an unlikely meeting where he befriended a deserter from the German Luftwaffe who became his very best friend for life. And on our father's 85th birthday, my sisters and I basically had to plead with him to put down in writing his thoughts in a memoir, and it was primarily meant for our family and for our children and his great-grandchildren. And he was very reluctant to do it because he really didn't want to talk about the war. We knew about aspects of it, but we really never had the complete full story. But we convinced him, and he actually spent every single day for the rest of his life, the next 4 years, writing the book. And my father was an accountant by training, but it turns out he's a very good writer as well.
He's an excellent writer.
We
He
enjoyed
really
it.
is, yes.
And the book was actually fully edited and vetted and completed a month before he died.
Unbelievable. In the early part of the book, he talks about your grandparents.
Yes.
They are heroes in and of themselves, and their
Yes.
story is remarkable. Can you share their trek to the United States?
Sure. Typical of many Jewish immigrants and other immigrants, my grandparents, my grandfather decided to flee the pogroms in Russia. And he sort of organized his then-to-be wife's family, and they had a very long trek, escaping at night with boats. And my grandfather was very strong, and he would pull the boat up along the shore at night.
He built a canoe
Yeah.
or something.
And you know, there's many of these stories, but it was really remarkable that they escaped and made it, and they came to Milwaukee, which I call the old country, and you know, became very successful immigrants. And my father, of course, was the beneficiary of that.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting. I think it was 1943, your father decided that the war was going on. He decided to enter the U.S. Army. That changed his life forever.
Yes.
Not only his, I mean, it transformed everybody.
Right, but right after Pearl Harbor, he was a student at the University of Wisconsin, and he decided to enlist, and he did, and he had basic training, and he goes through it in depth in the book, and he went from one experience to another. He encountered some very significant anti-Semitism in the U.S. Army. And by luck, my father had never shot a gun before, but by luck, he became, in his first experience with a gun, he was an expert marksman. And that really changed his life because he kept going to different schools. He went to sniper school, then he went to an engineering school, and he did some intelligence training. And all of this sort of kept him from D-Day, but very shortly after that, he was organized into a unit and was shipped in and became a sniper in the very front lines of the Battle of the Bulge.
Yeah.
And what happened when he was captured? Do you recall?
Sure. I mean, this is sort of the heart of the story. That facts I didn't know, and I think most people didn't know. His unit was the very, very front line, and it was a very harsh winter, and they were not well prepared. The U.S. military wasn't able to supply the very front lines, so they were not well fed. They were not well armed. They only had one set of clothes, and it was very, very difficult. But that was paradise compared to what was about to happen to him.
Yeah.
And he details many of these stories, and they evolve one after another, like a movie plot where
The suffering was inhuman, so incredible to even comprehend.
And he escapes one situation. In his unit, something like 120 men, I believe he said only 28 survived the war.
Wasn't one killed when he was walking with him?
Yes.
Shot, and he was covered with blood?
Yeah, that was a shell landed right in front of him, and the force of the blast was absorbed by this other soldier, and my father was covered in blood. In addition, the sound and the shockwaves from that made him largely deaf throughout the rest of his life. He only had about 15% hearing.
Wow.
So he struggled with that, but he survived. There's another event when he was trapped and when the Panzer tanks were coming, where he was in a foxhole. And to save bullets, the Germans would just move the tanks up this hill at the very front of the beginning of the Battle of the Bulge and just grind the soldiers to death in the foxholes. And my grandfather told my father, my grandfather was drafted in the Russian army, and my grandfather said, if you ever get in trouble, remember your faith, remember God, and to say the Shema. So my father tells the story where he started whispering the Shema and saying it louder and louder, and as the tanks were approaching, and sort of miraculously to him, there was a fog that came up, and it was just enough for him to escape by crawling on his belly without a weapon over the hill. And when he got down to the bottom, he ran, but he made a choice to go through the German lines rather than going back because the U.S. forces were being routed. And he figured he'd have a better chance of survival trying to go through the lines.
God, I tell you, it's a miracle.
It really is, but there is a little levity in the story. Could you tell about the incident with the chicken soup?
Yes. So this is actually before he was captured. And he was in a unit. He was the only Jewish fellow, I believe, in the unit. And so they were on patrol, and they came across a farmhouse. And they were not well fed. They were largely starving. And my father, they caught some chickens. And the sergeant said, well, Max, you're Jewish. You must know how to make chicken soup. Make some chicken soup. So my grandmother, who was a marvelous cook, apparently never taught him how to make chicken soup. So what he did was he took his helmet, took the lining out, he boiled some water, he plucked out a few feathers, he put the chicken in there. That's all he did. And the water was sort of lukewarm, and when he thought it was done, he took a sip, and it was so vile that he threw up. So
That was the end of his chicken soup.
yeah, that was the end of
You know, something that's interesting, because of his background and because he understood Yiddish, that was also what saved his life in another point. When he was with the SSS, or SS, two S's are enough, they were looking at the people that they were captured, and they looked at one of the young men in front of him, and his name said Goldstein. And the SS said, "Stehen Sie auf." And nobody understood. And they picked up this Goldstein, pulled him up, and because his name was Goldstein, he was a Jew, they shot him in the head.
Yes.
Explain what happened after that.
So this was at a point in time where they had been prisoners for a while and were very malnourished. They all had dysentery. And my father, because he grew up, he only spoke Yiddish until he was 5 years old, understood the German well enough. And after he saw this fellow being shot, my dad stood up behind and said, "Okay, guys, get up. These guys aren't messing around. Stand up." And the officer comes up to him and points the revolver at my father and starts talking to him in German. And there's a great passage in the book and in English he asked what his name was, and he said, "My name is Max Gendelman," like N-N.
And German.
And he said something like, "Are you, where are you from?" And he said, "Well, I'm from Milwaukee." And the SS officer said, "Milwaukee, it's a good German city." And my father said, "Jawohl." And he said, "Are you a German boy?" And my father said, "Yes, I'm a German boy." And then the officer said, this is all back in Yiddish, and the officer says, "Well, your English is, your German is very bad." And my father sort of just shrugged his shoulders, and he said, "Okay, you're now our translator." And because of that, it actually, in a few instances, saved his life, because he could understand the German. He became the liaison. And then later, when he was in the 3rd prisoner of war camp, it was that knowledge of German and being the liaison that allowed him to meet his lifelong friend, Karl Kirschner, who was the deserter from the Luftwaffe.
Yeah, that's a miracle. The whole thing is a miracle. Nonetheless, let's talk about how he met his friend.
So my father ended up in a little town called Linda, Germany. Linda, Germany is near the Czech-German border. And they were sent there in boxcars for about 5 days. And the cars were strafed. Even the Germans put a Red Cross on them, but they did that on all their trains. So the cars were strafed by American fighters. And aside from that, from the dysentery and the disease, many of the men died. And when they finally got to this camp, it was in the middle of the winter, and they just had a barbed wire set up, and they dumped these men out. And my father, being the liaison, was asked to organize the men. And so the Germans would say, "Oh, we need 8 men to do this," and so time went on. And there was a lady, an old lady, whose farm they had taken over. The Germans had taken over. And she started approaching my father because he had some access to go to the commandant's room, and he started giving him rutabagas to eat. And
It was like a gift from God.
because that's what they grew on this farm. And eventually, my father met through this lady at night, one night at midnight, a man about his age, a boy about his age, 20 years old. Through the fence. He was on the other side of the fence. His arm was in a sling, and his name, we later learned, was Karl Kirschner, and he was the grandson of this lady. And they started having these conversations, which are, very interesting in the book. But Karl, at the next night, snuck him up to the grandmother's house, and the grandmother made him a feast. Some meats, and they had some
cognac,
yeah.
and they smoked cigars. And there's a very cute story in there. Carl asked my father, "Well, do you play chess?" My father said, "Yes, I play some chess." Well, it turns out my father was a chess champion in high school, and so they start playing this chess game, and my father easily beat Carl the first game. And Carl looked very sad, and my father figured he doesn't really know what's going on here. He doesn't know who Carl is, but he better let him win.
Right.
So they did this for a few days. And Carl was feeling out my dad because he was concerned. They could hear the artillery from the Russian front coming. And Carl didn't want to be overtaken by the Russians. He thought he would be killed by them. And so he approached my father and said, "Max, I would like you to help me escape to the West."
On that note, we're going to take a break. We'll be back with the remainder of our program right after this brief message. Don't forget what you were saying.
Community, like every gift, counts. Together, we can ensure a vibrant Jewish future. Federation and you, changing the world together.
Welcome back. Bruce, you were in the middle of telling us about Carl and Max's escape.
Yes, so their planned escape. So my father was, very clever. He called himself a different kind of soldier. He was an expert marksman. But here they are very deep in German territory. They know the war is over. The Russians are advancing. And Carl was afraid for his life. And so my father said, fine, I'll do it. I don't know what's going to happen here with these soldiers. I don't know if the Germans, the SS, is going to shoot us all when the war is over. Well, let's do it. But there's a few things. You have to listen to exactly what I say. And we need supplies. He said, I need uniforms, I need papers, we need food, and I need a weapon. And Carl's grandmother says, I'll have all of that for you tomorrow. You're leaving tomorrow. So the next night, they organized, and the grandmother had this little sack of food wrapped in a handkerchief. They had a tandem bicycle. They had 2 German uniforms that didn't fit. And they had a revolver with about 9 bullets.
Wow.
And my father said, well, I guess that's good enough. And they were about to set off, but he said to, in Yiddish, he said to the grandmother and to Carl, he said, but there's something I have to tell you. He said, I'm not a German boy, I'm Jewish. And Carl said, actually Carl spoke English, and he said, Max, of course I knew that. He said, it makes no difference to me. We'll be friends, and let's go.
But before they left, tell us about the soldier.
Oh, yes. So that night, someone was watching another soldier, American soldier, was watching my father sort of escape through this little crack in the fence each night. And he came to him that night and said, I know you're planning something. I know you're planning escape. His name was Nick Grano from Ohio. And he said, if you don't take me, I'm going to tell the Germans.
Whoa.
And my father didn't know what to do, but he said, fine, but you're going to listen to me. And if we make it, you owe me a marker for the rest of your life. He said, fine. So the 3 of them left, and they had some interesting stories along the way. They were picked up twice by the Germans and got through the American lines.
Don't tell everything because they won't read the book.
All right.
You know something, your background and what ultimately happened and the relationship that they had is remarkable.
Yes.
That was a very, very important part of your life. How did your father's story and the relationship with Carl affect you?
Enormously, which isn't in the book. But Carl was a big part of our life. He was at my wedding. They would see each other at least once a year. They would talk on the phone a lot. Carl became a very successful doctor in California. And when I was in high school, wanted to become a doctor. And my father said, well, if you're going to be a doctor, you have to talk to Carl. So I got on the phone, I'm talking to Carl, and it's between my sophomore and junior year of high school. He says, what are you doing this summer? I said, well, I had some plans. He said, cancel all your plans. You're going to come live with me, and I'm going to show you what it's like being a doctor. So I flew up by myself to San Luis Obispo, California, and I lived with Carl for 3 months. Wow. And he actually has 3 sons, 2 sons about my age and 1 much younger. And I lived with them. And I would get up with Carl early in the morning, and he was a pathologist. And we would go to the hospitals. And at the end of the summer, it was very interesting. And at the end of the summer, he said, so what do you think? I said, well, I think it's very interesting. And he said, do yourself a favor, don't go into medicine.
But didn't he give you his prized possession?
Yes, he did. He gave me, which I still have and I still look at very often, he gave me a very expensive microscope. And I was always very involved in science, and I used that microscope a lot. And so we were very, very close.
Why I say something, Bruce is such a remarkable photographer. And why it's so interesting to find out how this life impacted you. I have a feeling that it made a difference in terms of what you photographed. You have a collection, and we'd like to share it with our viewers, some of it, if you don't mind, and then we'll come back to Dad's book, okay?
Of course.
The first one that you're going to show is the one about the train.
Yes.
Can you explain about that?
So several years ago, my wife and I took a trip to Berlin. Mm-hmm. And I'm a very, very passionate and avid amateur photographer, but I always take pictures, and I always have. My grandfather gave me a camera when I was 10 or 11 years old. But when we went to Berlin, I was actually very haunted by the city, knowing that my father had fought the Nazis, that the U.S. and allies defeated the Nazis. And here we were in the center of Berlin, where the Reichsstadt was and where Hitler lived and worked.
You wrote something beautiful, yes. And I wanted you to have a chance to to read that.
I titled this photograph, "The Last Train to Death." 100 meters from the tracks are extremely luxurious estates that were owned by the elite of German society. Every morning the Jews were either marched through the neighborhood or brought by truck to the train station, where they were loaded onto boxcars, counted and logged by the clerks, and then shipped to the death camps by the SS. The tracks have only recently been lined with memorial plaques. The plaques recede from view with one per day and the number of, in quotes, passengers per day. The SS, the German railway company, was paid a per head fee. The following is an excerpt from the testimony of a Holocaust scholar, Raoul Hilberg. The Reichsbahn was ready to ship in principle any cargo in return for payment. And therefore, the basic key was that the Jews were going to be shipped. So long as the railroads were paid by the track kilometer, so many pfennigs per mile. The rate was the same throughout the year, with children under 10 going at half fare, and the children under 4 going free. But payment only had to be made one way. This is a photo of the last train from the Berlin station, which was March 27th, 1945, and contained 18 Jews. Never mind that the war was lost and almost over. The shipments continued nonetheless.
They still ship them out there.
That's so impactful.
You
Isn't
have,
that photograph-
yeah,
isn't
it
that
is.
amazing?
You have, your next one, I think, is about the clerk's office at the train station.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which is
I
also very powerful.
I call this photo, "The Train Men Saw Nothing." This window in the Berlin train station in the elite neighborhood that was used to send the district Jews to the death camps. The clerk sat behind this window at the desk and counted as each passenger was boarded on the train by the SS. The passengers' images would have been reflected in the glass as they passed the window, and the faint images of the clerks perhaps were seen by the passengers. The old building stands empty, the window is cracked, the paint is peeling, and the angle is disorientating.
Wow. Oh my goodness. First of all, that photograph speaks to you, even though with the commentary, but it really speaks to you even if you don't say anything about it.
Yeah.
Wow, my goodness. You have tons of them.
Well, you've got to
Which
do.
one? Which one?
I would like to talk actually about this one, which is my favorite photograph in this collection. I call it Reflections on Berlin. And this
that's
one's
amazing.
called
Yeah.
Distorted Reality. This photograph is in the area outside the Jewish girls' day school. As I walked the back of the building, I looked up and saw a reflection in the window, this chimney. I was instantly struck by the distorted image as a ghost of the crematorium at the gas chambers. The window's old double-pane glass reflected the light of the chimney, making it difficult to tell what is real, what is a reflection or an illusion. The girls looked out of this window from the classrooms and looked up into the window from the courtyard, and they themselves ended up in smoke in other German chimneys.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
Incredible.
I don't know, something, all this had to change your life something in a very dramatic way. Really, don't you think so?
Oh.
I mean, his father's experience, the writing the book, taking the photographs. Your sister also went on a photographic journey
Yes.
too.
Well,
Can you tell us what she discovered?
yes, well, I have two wonderful older sisters. And
This is Nina, I think.
Yes, my sister Nina has retired from being a Jewish librarian in Jewish day schools, and her husband as well, and they have become now artists. And my sister does quilts, and my brother-in-law does sculpture. And they were in Germany very recently and decided to figure out how to get to Linda, Germany.
Oh,
So my sister, being a librarian, contacted the librarian Linda. One thing led to another, and she had a meeting with the mayor of Linda, Germany, who said, yes, we sent him the book. He said, I'd be delighted to host you, but I don't want to tell you any of the details. Just plan on spending the day. So my sister and her husband went there, were greeted by the mayor in his office. They had some coffee. They had a translator. He spoke English, but had a translator with them and said, okay, the day is going to begin, and in the next room there are two people I want you to meet. And they went to the next room, and there was an old man and his son. Both didn't speak English. And the old man turned out was Karl Kirchner's first cousin. He was in he was in his 90s.
That's amazing.
And he didn't really know the details of what happened to Karl. He knew
But he knew he was a doctor.
He knew he escaped Germany and never came back, and was a doctor in the United States, and that's all he knew. So my sister filled in some details, and then the mayor said, it's time we go to the next venue. They got in the car, drove 2 minutes, and they went actually to the site that was the prisoner of war camp, which was the Kirchner family home. And Karl had told us that there's nothing there, it's all been destroyed. Well, it wasn't. The two main structures were still there. The area where my father was a prisoner of war, basically outside, and there was a little shed. The shed was gone, and the outside barbed wire area is now a soccer field. For the,
Oh, my goodness.
and so my sister and her husband met the owners, and it's now used as a garage, and several other townspeople, and they had a tour, and they took pictures. And then the mayor said, now we have another venue, and he took them to a little guest house where there were other townspeople, and asked my sister to give a book talk.
Oh,
Oh, my goodness.
So nobody knew why she was there, and she starts explaining that my father was a prisoner of war here, and there were some questions. You mean a guest worker? And said, no, my father was an American prisoner of war. And then when she mentioned, well, he was a Jewish prisoner of war, that surprised them as well. But she said it was truly one of the, if not the most important days of her life. They kept her there for 6 hours. They kept bringing out coffee and sausage and pastries and beer, and they wanted to hear more and more. And one-on-one, the people were wonderful. Because this was in part of East Germany, virtually no one spoke English, so the translator translated. But it was a very touching experience for both parties.
Yeah.
It
You know
must have been.
something? Before you get off the air, and we don't have time, and I'm so sorry because we could go on for a long time. Would you read the
Yes.
Wolf Blitzer statement on the front of the jacket of the book?
This World War II memoir is a remarkable history of survival and friendship. If an American military sniper, a young Jewish man from Milwaukee, can befriend a German Luftwaffe pilot and become lifelong friends, then we can all certainly hope for a better world. Wolf Blitzer, CNN.
I want to tell you something that makes me teary. Thank you so much.
Thank you for allowing me to tell my father's story.
I loved it.
Thank you too. And thank you for joining us, and we'll see you again next week when we take another look into the Jewish world. Goodbye from Mosaic.